Now, obviously, in order to keep this war going, you have to convince Americans that Russia is really a grave threat to them. You have to, just like when the United States wanted to invade Iraq, it wasn't enough just to convince Americans that Iraq and Saddam Hussein were bad. They had to convince Americans that Saddam Hussein had actually done something bad to the United States in order to get Americans to want to do something bad back to Iraq. And that was where people like Jeffrey Goldberg came into play when they started publishing articles strongly suggesting that Saddam Hussein had been in an alliance with al-Qaeda and therefore participated in the planning of the 9/11 attack. And in September of 2003, 6 months after the war began, 70% of Americans believed Saddam Hussein had planned the 9/11 attacks because obviously they were subjected to that kind of propaganda for so long from the very people who are still in power in media and political circles. On Sunday night, 60 Minutes ran a segment that, I heard about this segment and I watched it this morning. And when I watched it this morning, I said to my colleagues here, we have to show this. We have to do this. It's so shockingly deranged. It's intended to resuscitate a long debunked conspiracy theory called the Havana syndrome, which was a claim that arose during the Trump administration that the Russians had somehow developed in secret this 25th century technology from the future that allowed them to direct energy waves into the brains of American citizens, specifically diplomats and intelligence officials stationed in Cuba, to direct energy waves into their brain through their ears, and that they had catastrophic brain injuries. And the more the media talked about this, the more people deployed overseas began convinced that they had these symptoms, because that's how mass psychosis works. That's how social contagion works. The more people claim that they're experiencing something, the more other people will convince themselves that they're also experiencing that. It happens in many, many instances. And starting back in the Trump administration, NBC News and others started claiming that Russia, as part of this Russia fearmonger campaign, had developed this miraculous weapon and that they were using it to attack the brains of these people. And the more these people heard it in the State Department and the CIA and overseas, the more people started claiming that they had these similar symptoms. And even the US government investigated it for years. The obvious idea was, oh, look, Trump is allowing Russia to attack American service members and intelligence officials and State Department officials, attacking their brains, and he refuses to do anything about it because he's in bed with Russia. But then even the US government investigated it and found that the whole thing was a fiction, that there were no brain injuries that any of these people had experienced. They gave them MRIs and every other exam known to modern science. They concluded that they were creating these symptoms psychosomatically. It began when a couple of State Department officials heard what they said were very strange, high-pitched noises, and they ended up matching it perfectly to the sounds emitted by crickets who are common to the Caribbean in Cuba. But from there, it just snowballed. But even the US government has given up on this. The CIA, the FBI, the State Department, all investigated and all concluded that it was a hoax. And yet 60 Minutes went back last night as the $60 million needs to get to Ukraine over Russia, but also as the US intelligence agency is gearing up to demanding greater and greater controls over the internet in the name of Russian disinformation against the 2024 election. Both of those goals require high levels of fear on the part of American citizens when it comes to Russia. And so this 60 Minutes segment that was in this tone, like they had broken some huge story, that they were blowing the lid off of some big cover-up in the United States government, that in reality, this crazy weapon existed, was broadcast on Sunday night. And I watched it and I couldn't believe it as even just as propaganda. It is so crazy that it's hard to overstate. Now I want to show it to you, but before I do, I just want to show you what the US government's response is obviously the US security state is eager to ratchet up fears about Russia. They have no interest in hiding scandals about Russia. They're constantly leaking fear-mongering about Russia, and yet even they said in response to 60 Minutes, quote, in response to inquiries from 60 Minutes, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence referred to the intelligence community's annual threat assessment commentary on, quote, anomalous health incidents. Quote, we continue to closely examine anonymous health incidents, AHIs, particularly in areas we have identified as requiring additional research and analysis. Most intelligence agencies have concluded that it is very unlikely a foreign adversary responsible for the reported AHIs. So obviously the intelligence community would love to blame this on Russia, and even they're saying it's extremely unlikely that this has anything to do with Russia. And so 60 Minutes has to figure out a way to try and convince people that they should not only be scared of Russia, but hate Russia for attacking the United States. And here's what they came up with.
Tonight, we have important developments in our 5-year investigation of mysterious brain injuries reported by U.S. national security officials. The injured include White House staff, CIA officers, FBI agents, military officers, and their families. Many believe that they were wounded by a secret weapon that fires a high-energy beam of microwaves or ultrasound. This is our 4th story, and for the first time, we have evidence of who might be responsible.
Ooh, who might be responsible for this secret weapon that has injured the brains of American diplomats and CIA operatives overseas, according to them? The first time we figure out who's to blame, you're never going to guess. And by the way, I hate April Fool's jokes. I don't even like to recognize them at the top of the show. And I said, good evening, it's April 1st. You'll notice I didn't even refer to the fact that it's April Fool's. I hate April Fool's jokes. So this is not an April Fool's joke, even though it really does seem like it should be. Let's listen to the rest. There you see targeting Americans.
Most of the injured have fought for America, often in secret, and they're frustrated that the U.S. government publicly doubts that an adversary is targeting Americans. Irresponsible. She spoke with the FBI's permission, but wasn't allowed to discuss the cases she was on when she was hit. We have learned from other sources one of those cases involved this Mustang going 110 miles an hour.
Pull over! Pull over!
In 2020, near Key West, Florida, deputies tried to stop the Mustang for speeding. It ran 15 miles until it hit spike strips laid in its path.
Get out, put it out!
A search of the car found notes of bank accounts.
Citibank, Discover Savings, 75.
My God, bank accounts, very, very suspicious. This speeding car, this whole thing is supposed to be an explanation for how we know that Russia is to blame for this very secret weapon that injured the brain of this crazy woman who worked for the FBI. And they're saying she was one of the cases she was assigned to work on was this case of the speeding car. And they stopped the speeding car, and among the papers were notations of bank accounts. And listen to what else.
5,000.
And this device that looks like a walkie-talkie can erase the car's computer data, including its GPS record. There was also a Russian passport.
What's your first name?
Vitaly, V-I-T-A-L-I-I.
Vitaly Kovalev was the driver from St. Petersburg, Russia, not Florida.
Why did you run? Let me be honest with me.
I don't know.
You don't know why you ran?
I don't know.
And we don't know why he ran. But what we learned suggests he was a Russian spy.
What we see here is Vitaly Kovalev fitting.
Now, again, this is all supposed to be proof that Russia has a secret weapon that it developed that injured that woman's brain. obviously there was nothing in this car that had anything to do with the secret weapon like that. He was speeding. He was speeding. And they caught him and they were like, I'm Russian. I'm Vitaly. And that's it. And now they're about to show you somebody whose credentials they hype up as some great investigator. And what he actually is he's an operative from Bellingcat. Bellingcat is the outlet that we've reported on many times. It's funded by agencies very closely linked to the CIA, from foreign governments as well. And the U.S. corporate media has decided that Bellingcat is a trustworthy news operation, even though they're funded by the CIA, by agencies very closely linked to the CIA. This person's name is Christo Grozev. He's really the only supposedly independent expert that they cite, and here you see him from his page at Bellingcat when he was a member of Bellingcat Productions, which looks to translate Bellingcat investigations into a range of new media products. He was the lead Russia researcher at Bellingcat until February 2023. Now, what they do always is they have these like exiles or former citizens of countries that hate those countries. So when they wanted, for example, to fabricate intelligence about Saddam Hussein, they relied on exiles of Iraq, people who hated the Iraqi government and wanted the United States to overthrow it because that would mean that they would come to power. They have Iranian dissidents as well that the West loves to use because they hate the government in Tehran and want to overthrow it and reinstall the Shah of Iran, the dictator that the United States and the West implanted and supported for decades. So they always have these exile communities of people who serve as intelligence agents against America's enemies, and they have a kind of ex-Soviet, ex-Russian community of which this person is a part. And he used to work at Bellingcat, and he's their expert. And listen to his explanation about why it is that we're supposed to now believe that this person is linked to the Russian government and had something to do with this secret weapon.
What we see here is Vitaly Kovalyk fitting exactly this formula.
Christo Grozev is a journalist legendary for unmasking Russian plots. In 2020, he uncovered the names of the Russian secret agents who poisoned Vladimir Putin's rival, Alexei Navalny. Grozev is lead investigator for our collaborator on this story, The Insider, a magazine by Russian exiles. We asked him to...
So he's with this outlet of Russian exiles that obviously is devoted to doing everything as possible to undermine the Russian government in the West. That's, again, the kind of people who manufactured the false intelligence to overthrow get the U.S. to overthrow their arch enemies in Iraq. Obviously, these people want the U.S. to do everything possible to undermine the Russian government, and he used to work at Bellingcat. And he's now their expert that they're turning to explain, even though the U.S. government has said this whole thing is concocted, as to why it is that we're supposed to believe this guy is connected, or this whole thing is connected to this 25th century secret weapon that the Russians have created.
Trace Vitaly Kovalev.
He studied in a military institute. He studied radio electronics with a particular focus on use within the military of microelectronics. He had all the technology know-how that would be required for somebody to be assisting an operation that requires high technology. And then all of a sudden, after working for 2 years in a military institute, he up and decides to become a chef.
Kovalev immigrated to the U.S. and worked as a chef in New York and Washington, D.C., even appearing at Far Left in a TV cooking segment.
Traditional Russian recipes, thanks to our wonderful chef.
But Kovalev was actually a Russian military electrical engineer with a top-secret security clearance.
Do you see how these people traffic in the most flagrant conspiracy theories? Imagine if there was some guy in Russia who decided to move to Russia, and he used to work for the U.S. military in like maintenance, electronic maintenance or something, and they were like, oh, it's completely impossible that somebody, once they're in the U.S. military or the U.S. intelligence, could go to a foreign country and then be somehow uninvolved. This whole thing is based on this conspiracy that because this guy worked as an engineer with in the Russian military, It's impossible that he decided to move to the United States and become a chef. He must be an agent for the Russian government. And even if you want to believe that, we're still not at the point of how any of this has to do with a secret weapon that this chef somehow developed. The US government claims it has the Russians under extreme intelligence to the point that we know for sure that it was Vladimir Putin who personally ordered the hacking of the DNC. We know for sure it was Vladimir Putin who personally ordered the killing of Alexei Navalny. We're constantly claiming we know every single thing the Russians are doing, and somehow a guy like this and his colleagues under our noses created some secret weapon that enables the Russians anywhere in the world to direct energy through the ears into people's brains, a technology we didn't even know existed. Here's the rest of their explanation.
Can someone like Kovalev simply decide to drop all of that and become a chef?
It is not an easy job to just leave that behind. Once you're in the military and you've been trained and the Ministry of Defense is invested in you, you remain at their beck and call for the rest of your life.
We don't know what Kovalev was up to, but our sources say over months he spent 80 hours being interviewed by FBI agent Kerry, who had investigated multiple Russia, and a year later when she awoke to the same symptoms in the middle of the night in California.
It felt like.
Now, before I show you more of her, and this is the whole thing. So she was investigating this guy who was speeding, the chef who was speeding. And apparently that's supposed to be the motive for why the Russians decided to attack her brain. She was not on the verge of discovering anything. And even if she were, her knowledge would be institutional knowledge. It would be, well, what benefit would there be to make her have a bunch of headaches? Because she was investigating this Russian chef who was speeding near Key West in Florida. Do you see the intricate conspiracy theories they've weaved? Now, remember, these are all dependent upon people who work in the government who now have to claim that, like, oh, I started having these weird symptoms in my head, these weird headaches, these debilitating symptoms that no modern science can find. They've had doctors examine all these people. They cannot find anything that is happening inside their brains, any kind of brain dysfunction at all. It's just them claiming that these symptoms they heard on the TV that other people have, that they have themselves. Now, as you listen to her, I just want to show you that there's this very common dynamic that anyone who's a journalist or any kind of political blogger or writer knows very well, which is that you constantly get emails from people who write very long emails and they claim that they are the victims of things very similar to this, that they are being attacked by microwaves. They claim they're being gang stalked. They claim that they are being tortured by all sorts of similar devices of this kind, invisible energy devices directed at their brains. And it may be true, but what ends up happening is a lot of people hear about this community of people and they write every journalist almost every week with these really long emails trying to insist you have to uncover this. This is the biggest story ever. It makes the Snowden story seem minuscule in nature, and they write you really long emails about how they're being tortured by these invisible energy waves. They're convinced of it. And the more they hear other people describing it, there's a lot of people who then have difficulty in life, who struggle in life with depression, with all kinds of symptoms, with headaches, and they start saying, oh, I must be gang stalked as well. I must be one of these people who are targeted. And the New York Times actually wrote a long article on them because New York Times reporters are among the people whose email inboxes are inundated with them. When I went around the country, when I was giving speeches and making appearances as part of the Snowden reporting, it was frequent that people who identify as being in this community of people who are being gang stalked would appear at my events. And when I did book signings at the end or met people, a lot of them were very menacing and obviously unwell and unhinged, and they would come up to me and they would say, when are you going to show the part of the Snowden archive about how we're being gang stalked? I mean, it's a community of people who believe this. And they call themselves targeted individuals, and they believe that there are these new, unknown, secret weapons that have been invented by the US government that cause them to feel extreme pain in their brains. And the New York Times wrote an article headline, the United States of Paranoia, they see gangs of stalkers. Quote, nobody believed him. His family told him to get help. But Timothy Trespass, an out-of-work recording engineer in his early 40s, was sure he was being stalked, and not just by one person, but dozens of them. He would see the operatives, he said, disguised as ordinary people lurking around his Midtown Manhattan neighborhood. Sometimes they bumped into him and whispered nonsense into his ear, he said. Quote, now you see how it works, they would say. At first, Mr. Trespass wondered if it was all in his head. Then he encountered a large community of like-minded people on the internet who called themselves, quote, targeted individuals, or TIs, who described going through precisely the same thing. And so these people would meet each other and become convinced that they all shared common symptoms. Because we're social animals, we can connect to one another and become convinced that what other people's experiences are our experiences as well. That's what social contagion is. Or mass psychosis, another not as nice word for it. And here was a YouTube video that the New York Times featured of some of the people who claimed to be part of this community.
The most important thing in life will always be the people in this room. Right?
So is it New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania on the screen, Connecticut?
President Obama and citizens of the world.
We are TIs,
targeted individuals,
and law-abiding citizens being targeted
Every day of our lives.
By all levels of government and outside agencies.
Using military-grade, highly sophisticated,
And harmful technologies designed to destroy our lives.
for absolutely no reason at all.
Support us in ending our torture now!
Hi, my name's Terry. I'm a registered nurse. I'm a TI.
I'm Tom. I'm a TI.
I'm Mary, and I'm a TI.
Hi, my name is Julie, and I'm a registered nurse, and I am a TI.
Hello, I'm Gloria. I'm a grandmother of 4, an entrepreneur. I'm a TI.
Hi, my name is Denise. I'm an entrepreneur and I'm a TI.
Hi, my name is Karma. I'm a grandmother. I'm a nurse, and I am a TI.
Hi, my name is Franz, a code interpreter. I'm a TI.
Hi, my name is Steve. I'm a proud father of 2, and I am a TI.
We are TIs, targeted individuals. Google us.
I'm coming home, I'm coming home, I'm coming home. Tell the world
Now, as I said, I've heard from these people for years, and I have no doubt about their sincerity. They really do believe that whatever difficulties they face in their life, they face because they have been targeted with this secret technology, as they just explained, and they're being tortured. Now, obviously the point of the New York Times article was to mock these people, to make them sound like they were crazy. These are crazy people who just start copying one another. And most people who get emails from them do believe they're crazy. You end up blocking them or sending their emails automatically to spam because they're convinced, but you can't prove any of their symptoms. But they insist that they have them, that they're being stalked by a technology that the government is using to torture them. Now, this is exactly what these people sound like, who are insisting that the Russians have targeted their brains with this secret technology. Listen to them.
Russia, and a year later when she awoke to the same symptoms in the middle of the night in California.
It felt like I was stuck in this state of like disorientation, not able to function, like what is happening, and my whole body was pulsing.
Mark Zaid is Russia. Vitaly Kovalevich.
By the way, that Mark Zaid there is their lawyer. He's a lawyer representing most of these people. You can go on to Twitter. He's like Nina Yankovic, or he's like any of these crazy resistance liberals who spend all day long on Twitter saying that Donald Trump is a fascist and he's in bed with Putin. That's their lawyer, the lawyer in Washington who's running around saying, no, the Russians have attacked their brain. Here's the rest of this article about what happened to the guy who was speeding.
Kovalev served his time and in 2022 went back to Russia, ignoring American warnings that he was in danger because he'd spent so much time with the FBI. Christo Grozev found this death certificate from last year, which says Kovalev was killed at the front in Ukraine. Do you think Kovalev was sent to Ukraine as a punishment?
One theory is that he was sent there in order for him to be disposed of.
Is Kovalev really dead, or is this another cover story?
That is a very good question, and we actually worked on both hypotheses for a while. I do believe at this point that he was dead.
We're dealing.
I mean, it goes on like this. They had a couple other people talking about the similar symptoms that they had. And you'll notice there's zero evidence. It's all this like connecting the dots conspiracies about some Russian who was speeding. And again, they claim, some Bellingcat guy claims that he was a mechanical engineer, and that means what? That he was capable of developing this secret weapon that even the US intelligence community, in protecting their people, investigated, concluded did not happen. Now, here is the report from BioRix in 2019, which was the first sign that this was all just the unhinged ramblings of some obviously unwell people who work for the FBI and the State Department, where they recorded the sounds that they believed they were hearing. They were like, oh my God, I hear the weapons, and they recorded them, and they turned it over to the government, and the government gave it to these independent researchers who published their findings, and what they found was this, quote, recording of sonic attacks, in quotes, scare quotes, on US diplomats in Cuba spectrally matches the echoing call of a Caribbean cricket. So you had like woman like that crazy woman who's like, I'm feeling disoriented, and the Russians are, and they recorded the sounds, and they're like, here, we got the sounds on tape, and they matched it to the sound. Here from the Jason report in November 2018, quote, the most likely source of the sound is the Indies short-tailed cricket. The call of this animal matches in nuanced detail the spectral properties of the recordings from Cuba once room echoes are taken into account. A possible explanation for the reported symptoms is psychogenic illness, in part because the science is weak to declare any causal links from RF or acoustic weapons to brain injury without prior baseline measurements in a control group of similar background. It is also worth noting the psychogenic effects on vestibular function are common, and the symptoms can be chronic. In other words, it's common that people who have symptoms of this kind start imagining them because they're hearing them from other people. This is a government report that covers a lot of the same, that obviously takes from the same report of the audio report, but then goes further and pretty much clearly implies strongly that these people are psychosomatically creating these symptoms. Quote, although the JAMA paper dismisses such a dizziness theory, Jason believes psychogenic effects may serve to explain important components of the reported symptoms. Now, just this last month, the Washington Post, actually, sorry, it was last year, March 1st, 2023, so last year, about a year ago, they have this, quote, Havana syndrome not caused by energy weapon or foreign adversary, intelligence review finds, quote, after a years-long assessment, 5 U.S. intelligence agencies conclude it is very unlikely an enemy wielding a secret weapon was behind the mystery ailment. The mysterious ailment known as Havana syndrome did not result from the actions of a foreign adversary, according to a U.S. intelligence report that shatters a long disputed theory that hundreds of U.S. personnel were targeted and sickened by a clandestine enemy wielding energy waves as a weapon. 7 intelligence agencies participated in the review of approximately 1,000 cases of, quote, anomalous health incidents. The term the government uses to describe a constellation of physical symptoms, including ringing in the ears, followed by pressure in the head, and nausea, headaches, and acute discomfort. 5 of those agencies determined it was, quote, very unlikely that a foreign adversary was responsible for the symptoms, either as the result of purposeful actions such as a directed energy wave weapon, or the byproduct of some other activity, including electronic surveillance that unintentionally could have made people sick, the official said. Now, obviously the fact that the intelligence community says it's not true doesn't prove it's not true. But they've had all kinds of research into these people, including reports that they're incapable of finding any irregularities in their brains, in their biological organism. And you can hear these people, these symptoms are very vague, and it's very easy to see how you can talk yourself into these symptoms if you turn on the TV and you hear that Russia is targeting the brains of Americans overseas. It's very common. I was just talking to some ER health provider last week who was explaining to me how common it is when people who get into the emergency room, and if they're not taken quickly enough, immediately start creating other symptoms because of the anxiety and the fear that they're not being attended to quickly enough, that they're dying in the ER. And these symptoms are real. These people aren't lying. They feel these symptoms, but they're created by the brain. And so if you hear enough times on NBC News, and we've gone over these reports so many times, so over 2019 and 2020, Russia is attacking the brains, this mysterious weapon of through the ear, and you have these women like this being like, I have headaches and I got dizzy and I had pain in my head. Obviously, a lot of people can convince themselves that they have it. And lots of US government reports, including many more than we just read, indicate that's what happened here. In fact, we have done very extensive shows on the Havana syndrome over the years and presented all of the evidence comprehensively from inside the government, from individual researchers, people who cannot find any explanation other than things like when these people recorded what they claim was the sound of the weapon, it matched an exotic cricket common to that region. But you do need, if you're going to do things like get another $60 billion to Ukraine, or try and get Americans afraid enough of what Russia is doing online to justify even more control over the internet in the name of stopping them, you need elevated fears of Russia in the minds of the American people. And 60 Minutes and American liberals have made Russia that enemy and are more than happy to bolster using insane conspiracy theories whatever they can. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.